Chapter 4, Video 3 of 3. So we have so far covered epithelial tissue, connective tissue, and now we'll cover muscular tissue and nervous tissue. So for starters, muscular tissue will consist of fibers or cells that are modified for contraction, and thus they're going to provide movement or motion. They're going to help maintain posture, and they're going to be able to help us produce heat. So the function of the muscular tissue is to provide motion, to help maintain posture, and for heat production. Our muscle tissue will be divided into 3 types: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Now we actually won't be spending a lot of time talking about muscle here because we do have a chapter that is solely devoted to muscle. So we'll just go over the basics and the differences in the tissue here. Skeletal muscle is going to be attached to your bones. It's going to be striated, and it's going to be voluntary. So striated meaning that you'll actually be able to see lines or striations when you look at it under a microscope. It is voluntary in that you have to actually contract those muscles, get up and move around, wiggle your fingers, your toes, that you tell your body to do. Now, cardiac muscle is going to be similar to skeletal muscle in that it is also striated. However, it will be different because it is involuntary, as you want your heart to continue to pump, whether or not you tell it to beat or pump. And so with that also, cardiac muscle is going to be most of your heart wall. Smooth muscle or visceral muscle tissue will be found in the walls of hollow internal structures, so think blood vessels and viscera. It, however, is going to be the only of the 3 that is non-striated, and it is also, or normally, it is involuntary, meaning that your blood vessels will constrict to pass the blood and transport it through your body without you having to tell it to do so. It also helps you propulse food once you eat it, and it moves through the gastrointestinal tract, helps you to contract your urinary bladder and your gallbladder as well. So, quick little overview that you can watch. Now, there's also a little table in your book that tells you whether it's striated or involuntary and kind of goes through that. Nervous tissue. 2 types of cells here. You have your neurons and your neuroglia. Your neurons, those are going to be the cells that are actually the nerve cells themselves, whereas the neuroglia, those are more of the protective and the supportive cells. With your neurons, it's going to have 3 main parts: a cell body, and dendrites and axons. Your neurons are going to be sensitive to stimuli, and they'll take that stimuli and convert it into a nerve impulse so that it can be sent to other neurons, muscle fibers, or glands so that you can produce an action. The neuroglia, they are, we said, the supporting and the protective cells. So a lot of times they are just going to do that. But unfortunately, oftentimes these are the sites where tumors of your nervous system actually arise. So we don't spend a lot of time on the nervous tissue either, because these cell bodies, these dendrites, the axons, and the neuroglia cells will go into much more detail when we make it towards the second half of the semester. A little overview for you, though, on just the types of cells. Now, both your muscular cells and your neurons are going to be what we call excitable cells. They are excitable because they can actually carry an electrical signal. They'll respond to the neurotransmitters, and that's going to cause them to generate the signal so that they can exhibit their actions. So, now we've talked about the 4 different types of tissues. How are these tissues going to repair themselves if they're ever damaged or if they make it out of their homeostatic, relatively stable norms? Well, this tissue repair can replace anything that makes it out of the homeostatic process, or it can also just replace worn out, damaged, and dead cells as well. So each of the 4 types of tissue that we've talked about, they have a different capacity to be able to replenish their parenchymal, or their cells that are actually creating them. So epithelial cells can be replaced by the division of stem cells or any cell that is undifferentiated. So epithelial cells have a better or higher chance of tissue repair. As you'll know, when you get a cut on your skin, it grows. You get new cells to replace it. Now, some connective tissue cells, such as bone, have a continuous capacity for renewal. However, some connective tissue cells, such as cartilage, will replenish less readily. You'll have a question in your discussion board that talks to why those cartilage cells may be replenishing a little less rapidly. And then your muscle cells, as well as your nervous tissue cells, they both have a poor capacity for renewal. Now, once we do need to repair the tissue, if any kind of scar forms, that process is known as fibrosis. When we talk more about the skin in the next chapter, we'll talk more about fibrosis and how we actually repair epithelial tissue, for that matter there. But note that fibrosis is that process of the scar forming, and then granulation tissue is if we have actively growing connective tissue form when the injury itself becomes more extensive. Adhesions can be the clinical connection. So after maybe a surgery or a scar from some type of, any kind of cut or anything, or deep wound, you may have adhesions form, and that's where the tissue will abnormally join together. And a lot of times that happens in the abdomen. And so then it can cause you to have obstructions for your intestines. So you can have an intestinal obstruction that won't allow your food to pass, and so it can have some pretty serious consequences. As we know, nutrition plays an important role in most things that our body has, especially in the repair of our tissue. So we have vitamins such as A, some of the B vitamins, D, C, E, and K. Those will help your tissues to repair. And so you also need to have some proteins, because as we talked about, that ground substance, those fibers, all of those were proteins. So your body can take proteins that you feed and break it down and then create other proteins. So whereas you may not necessarily be eating or consuming collagen itself, your body can utilize other proteins to then break it down and maybe create collagen from what it has. Although, if you're following things now, a lot of people are taking collagen as a supplement to help with this tissue repair of their body. And then, of course, you need proper blood circulation for tissue repair to occur. So, please be sure that you go through these slides. You know the differences in the tissue types. And once you get those tissue types and the differences, you are able to know where the tissues occur, what type of fibers, what type of cells you have, and any other little tidbits of information.